Hey everyone, today I'm going to talk about two of my favorite books about trauma. They both say two different things about the same subject. One is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel Kolk, and the other one is The End of Trauma by Dr. George Bonanno. I wanted to talk about both of these books and both of these thinkers at the same time because even though they say two different things about trauma, I think that you need to know what these two different things are if you want to be able to navigate trauma discourse, mental health information, and misinformation both on the internet and in your own therapy experience. Before we get started, if you wouldn't mind liking or subscribing Psychobabble, I'd really appreciate it. The Body Keeps the Score. Many of you are probably familiar with this book. It's written by Bessel Kolk, and the idea behind this book is that the issues are in the tissues, that trauma is remembered and stored in the body. And I remember it having a profound impact on me for many reasons, but one of the main takeaways that I've seen help myself in my own therapy journey and in so many of my patients is that I'm able to integrate somatic techniques. So for those of you who aren't familiar, somatic therapy it's not like a very heady therapy. You're not like analyzing or processing or thinking about your thoughts. You're actually just being in your body and you're releasing that stress or releasing that trauma from different parts of your body. And some people get a little bit confused because they think, well, but isn't all of that in memory and in nerves? And it's like, yes, but it's experienced bodily. And I've seen that help so many people, including myself. But one of the reasons I don't really like this book, and I know he's a controversial figure for many reasons, but I do think that there's this implicit narrative that the book communicates in which he's basically saying that, something happens to you and that trauma is stored in your body until you release it or until you do something about it years later, or it's a wound that never ever heals, at least not without really intensive psychotherapy or a lot of clinical support. And I don't think there's any real evidence for that. And I don't even think that Dr. Kolk actually makes that claim directly. I think it's one of the things that's been taken from his work. In this book, I know he discusses how two people can get into the same car accident. One has full-blown PTSD and the other one doesn't. And so this brings up how trauma is not about what happened to you. It's actually technically incorrect to say that was traumatic or that traumatized me. Trauma is about your relationship to your past in the current moment. And that is made very, very clear in George Bonanno's book, The End of Trauma, How the New Science of Resilience is Changing How We Think About PTSD. This is kind of the counter argument to The Body Keeps the Score in a lot of really amazing ways. He makes the argument that actually PTSD and trauma is the exception. It's not the norm. One of the ways he does this is he actually studied first responders and people who were escaping the buildings during 9/11 in New York City when the two towers came crashing down. And he found that a lot of what we call trauma symptoms or the effects of trauma were present in the weeks or even months after because what happened was so horrible and devastating. But most people bounced back. Not everyone actually developed PTSD. And he talks about the science of resilience. When he talks about the science of resilience, he talks about many, many facets of it. But one of the things that sticks out to me is this idea that social support and safety amongst loved ones is absolutely crucial to having resilience to what we might call trauma, or he might broaden it to say tragedy or hardship. And what I love about this is it's not just a hopeful and empowering message, but it also frames the conversation in a way where people are empowered to show up for each other and to support one another in a way that I actually think is less clinical and less over-medicalized than Kolk's philosophy in The Body Keeps the Score. Because the idea that's implicit in The Body Keeps the Score is this idea that says, in order to release this trauma, in order to heal, you have to go see a healer or a practitioner that really knows what they're doing. And I think that anyone who studies the self-help or self-transformation space or the mental health space for 2 minutes knows that there's a lot of great therapists out there, but there's a lot of bad ones. And a lot of people are turning away from the bad therapists and they're actually going to coaches and healers and shamans, many of whom are practicing some version of somatic therapy. And a lot of times they're seeing really, really great results. I don't necessarily think that we should be setting up mental health culture or culture in general in a way that says, well, in order to get over the bad things that inevitably happen to you, you have to go pay for it. You have to go pay a shaman or a healer or a therapist. I mean, if there's a myth that is being peddled down from big therapy, like that has to be the one. You know what I mean? I much prefer Bonanno's interpretation that actually when bad things happen to us, we're going to be affected by them for a little bit, but we're going to get better. We're going to be okay. And one of the ways we can be resilient before, during, and after a tragedy or an event that you feel feel like you're having a trauma reaction to, is to develop resilience and to develop that sort of social support. The reason I wanted to present these two books and these two ideas together is to give you all some insight into how I think about psychology, but also how I think about absorbing knowledge and integrating knowledge, not just for my own understanding, but so I can apply those insights to the treatment of my patients. Both of these perspectives have equal utility. For me, it's not about it being either or. For me, it's about being both and. And sometimes when somebody sits down in front of me, we need to talk about the body. We need to talk about how the body keeps the score, and we need to talk about releasing some stress and some trauma that has been stored in their body, sometimes for years, for decades. I'm very fond of the saying, the issues are in the tissues, right? And for other people, we actually need to take a more solution-oriented approach. We need to be encouraging. We need to be mindful that as practitioners, we hold a lot of power and a lot of influence, and people come to us looking for answers. And if we believe that there is a trauma response and that there's abuse in the past, chances are we're going to find it, even if it's not necessarily there. I actually remember seeing on Instagram recently that a study was making its rounds on social media in which they were finding that psychotherapy is so effective at changing your memories that it should actually come with a warning label. And while there's a ton of informed consent that goes into therapy, it has me personally thinking, oh, maybe that's something I should include in my informed consent and at the beginning, particularly if we're taking a past-oriented approach where we're talking about mom and dad or past relationships or whatever it may be. And to be clear, I think it's a little bit unfair to say that like the therapist is changing your past as something that it wasn't. I think the process of memory reconsolidation is happening all the time, whether or not you're in therapy. And I think that the memory research has made one thing clear: memory is super unreliable. We don't remember to remember things objectively. We actually remember to create meaning out of them so we can use that meaning to guide our present decision making and our future decision making. If I had the honor of having Bessel van der Kolk and George Bonanno on my podcast, I think that I would want them to just talk about their different perspectives and where they think the other person's argument or philosophical point of view has merit and how they think about integrating them. Even though these two books are kind of counterpoints to each other in terms of their broader philosophical stance, I actually think that these thinkers probably agree on more than they disagree. So I actually talk about these two books in my book, Psychobabble, Viral Mental Health Myths and the Truths to Set You Free. And one of the things that I talk about in section 4, where I talk about trauma drama, is I talk about how confusing trauma discourse can be. And I think that one of the reasons it's so confusing is not because all of you are seeking to twist the words and use psychobabble and use trauma discourse to advance your own agenda. I think it's partially because Bessel van der Kolk, as far as I'm concerned, he's a hero. Like in the 70s or 80s, when the idea of PTSD was first proposed, the VA, the Veteran Affairs Administration within our federal government, laughed it off as a quacky, delusional theory. And now, of course, today it's all trauma, right? But I bring that up to say that this is very new. And one of the things that I do in my book is I really lay out all the different facets and arguments about everything from a trauma response to a trauma event, a little t trauma to a big T trauma, etc., etc. To this day, my most viral videos on Instagram and TikTok have been about trauma discourse. And so it was a lot of fun to write about that in the book and explore it in a longer form piece of content. And for those of you who are still listening, I just think it's very, very cool that I have a platform to be able to think about these things and totally nerd out with you all. And I want to know what you all think. So tell me any questions you have down below. As you may or may not have seen, I've actually been responding to questions anonymously through this medium form video format and on my podcast. And so please ask your question. And if I think that there's a way to kind of broaden its applicability to the general audience that is usually watching my stuff, I'll absolutely do that. Remember to like and subscribe and stay tuned for the next episode of Psychobabble.